Hello and welcome to Contemplations. I am Josh and I am joined by Carl.
Hello.
And I'm going to be talking about today how you can judge people based on their appearance. And this has,
Couldn't miss this one.
this has some unfortunate connotations, and we're going to be touching on the troubled history of this sort of thing and physiognomy in general. And we're also going to be looking at things such as what makes someone look more corrupt. We're also going to look at things like makes someone more likely to be a criminal and things of that nature, and also assessing just how accurate people's appearances are in judging their character, their personality, this sort of thing. And that is what we're going to do, more or less, although there are some things that I haven't mentioned there, just to leave in as a bit of a surprise. So you can't really talk about this without mentioning Sir Francis Galton, who was the half-cousin of Charles Darwin, and therefore a big fan of Charles Darwin's On the Origin of Species, and therefore he is one of the early adopters of this sort of genetic view of the world. And this led to lots of unfortunate things that history doesn't look too well on, but I'll get into that in a second. He's known for lots of other things. He was a polymath and clearly a very intelligent guy. So he's known for creating the concepts of correlation and regression to the mean in statistics, which I have done to death in psychology. So I have him to thank for that. He also, in the field of psychology, was the first to apply statistics to human differences, inheritance of intelligence, introduced the methodologies of using questionnaires and surveys to understand human beings. He devised the first weather map, proposed a theory of anticyclones, was the first to establish a complete record of short-term climatic phenomenon on a European scale. He also invented the Galton whistle for testing differential hearing abilities and was first to coin the phrase nature versus nurture. So he's quite the figure, really. I mean, obviously Charles Darwin is a household name, but I think his half-cousin gets a little bit overlooked.
Yeah, but there's always this advantage to being at the beginning of the discipline.
That's true.
Where there's a lot of stuff to be discovered, and it's all very surface level. It's easy to discover because it's the first stuff that you run into. So,
I'm a little bit jealous of the kind of proto-scientists because they had such an easy job. It's just like, well.
Right place, right time for a lot of it, I think.
However, one of the more controversial things he did was he coined the term eugenics and was an advocate of those with good genes pairing together with those who also had good genes, and he wanted to push out bad genes from the human population. However, unlike some of his predecessors, he didn't believe in actually killing people to do this.
How progressive.
I know, he's very charitable. So yes, I did look quite a lot. I might have missed something, but I wasn't able to find him actually saying we should, selectively kill people. He's just saying people should be aware that their genes are carried on, and therefore people with good genes should also select other people with good genes. And I mean, that's kind of what happens naturally anyway, isn't it?
Yeah, but this also isn't a surprise. I mean, who's the monk who did the same thing with plants?
I'm not sure.
There was a like 15th century monk or something who selectively bred plants to get them to grow taller, and I should have remembered his name.
Well, that's true of most domesticated plants.
Well, yeah, exactly. And we do the same for animals, of course, and so it's obvious that the same thing could apply to humans, as we are a form of animals.
However, I think because of this background with eugenics, he's a somewhat controversial figure. And that's one of those things where you're just going to have to kind of overlook it a little bit. But he wasn't he wasn't one of the people advocating for killing people, which is the main thing. Like, sure, he coined the term, he looked at it in a human context, but this was before it had the same moral weight. This was sort of Victorian era, so fair enough.
But I mean, it is true that if you get people with certain genetic advantages and pair them up, then they're going to have children who inherit those genetic advantages. It's not an untrue statement. So it's from his perspective, sort of the amoral Victorian science. That's true. It's only when you've got a teleology that you're right. Okay, we need to purify the Aryan race or something that you end up introducing aspects of right now. We need to kill off the underclass.
Yes,
it's not surprising he wasn't thinking that.
And one of the things that I'm going to be talking about here is that he invented a method of creating composite faces. So he devised this technique where he allowed for multiple exposures of the same photograph, and this allowed him to create composites of people's faces. He also, on a side note, noticed that these composite portraits were more attractive than any individual member, as rated by the participants. And this is actually discussed in Contemplations number 66, The Philosophy of Aesthetics, where we talk about averageness actually being something that, statistically speaking, is preferred, which is surprising, but that's not necessarily the focus today. And what we're going to be looking at is some of these composites. So he was able to create composites, first of a composite of two sisters together, things like that, 6 different medals with Alexander the Great on to try and get composite of his face. And you can see here in the middle on the right-hand side there, the criminal types. So he says he's got 8 cases in that top one and 4 cases in the bottom one, and one's kind of a more doughy-faced, kind of lowbrow. He does kind of look like he'll try and punch you in a pub.
Yeah, he looks like he's someone who's been in a few fights.
He does, yeah.
And the other one looks kind of a ratty, sort of low-class criminal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And this is where the sort of criminal face, that idea comes from. And of course, Galton, with his background coining the term eugenics, you can see why people are a little bit hesitant to...
He has a criminal face, my lord, yep, true, convicted.
Because, of course, the...
5 years hard labour.
The implications are that you can look at someone's face, say they have a criminal face, before they've actually committed any crime, you can arrest them and prevent them.
Pre-crime them.
Yes, exactly. But that never actually happened, obviously.
No.
But this is just an example. So here's some of the actual composite criminal faces there that he created. So
is the one in the bottom centre like the perfect criminal?
I'm not sure. That's just 7 people, including 2 and 3. So that's like a composite of some composites, I think.
Yeah. So this is what the archetypal criminal looks like.
He looks pretty nondescript, to be honest.
Yeah, he does. He looks like a...
I mean, that's the perfect criminal face
Yeah.
if you think about it, because if you've got any defining feature, you're going to be easy to identify.
And you're also right, though. If you look at the other faces that he's made up of, he is more handsome than the other faces, right? He actually is like more normal looking and like healthy looking.
I know. I think the way it works is that because of our kind of genetic makeup, we have these little quirks that we inherit, and then through averaging it out, all of these
the negatives get siphoned out. Sort of.
Exactly.
Right.
And through kind of creating this average, it's sort of why...
Raises the attractiveness of a person.
Yeah. I think it's also part of the reason why some people suggest that people are, on the whole, getting slowly more attractive over time, other than the dietary and all the other stuff as well. But yes, there's a lot to be said about this. I don't know whether I actually believe that there's such a thing as a criminal face, because, of course... That being said...
It's amusing to entertain the idea, though.
I know. That being said, you can kind of tell someone's background based on their face a little bit. I think a lot of it might be environmental, like you walk down the street and you see someone who looks really haggard. You assume, okay, well, they've had a life of heavy drugs or something.
Well, like we saw with the previous guy who's got the kind of like doughy face who looks like he's about to punch you. He's probably been in a bunch of fights. Like his face has probably been changed by the fact it's been punched a lot. And so someone's actual, like, I dread to use the term lived experience, but I actually think that lived experience is actually one of those things where there is some truth to it. That you will get people who will act in a certain way because of the way that other people around them have reacted to them generally through their life.
Of course. I mean, it doesn't make sense to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Just because the progressives talk about their lived experience doesn't mean that experience is worthless. In fact, it's very important.
But I do think there is actually some merit to it. The world will respond to you in a certain way if you look a certain way. And I think it might not be fair, but I think it is true.
Yes, and I think this is part of the reason why Galton coined the term nature versus nurture. So he's looking at the difference between the nurture or the environmental influence and the biological influence, which is the nature aspect. And of course, it's difficult to tell from these faces which is which, really. You can't really say, oh, well, this is genetic or this is environmental, because you can't really separate that just looking at it here.
But I do wonder how much like the expression a person carries is an effect of. I'm sure that the way they like approach the world, like the general demeanor of a person must be about the nurture, right?
Yes, well,
because I mean, look at this chap in the top left. God, he looks mean.
He looks pretty miserable, doesn't he?
He does. And I can't help but think that if he was born to an aristocratic class and he had everything given to him on a silver platter, maybe he'd be a bit more jolly in his disposition.
Well, I think that people wear the facial expression. It's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. They have the facial expression which suits the way in which they're treated in the world.
Maybe.
I've seen research that has looked at this, and supposedly people actually adopt the social role in which people endow upon them based on their face. So if they have really sharp features, people assume they're a bit nasty, and therefore they sort of live up to that expectation a little bit more. And equally, if they're very sort of doughy faced and look quite amenable and approachable,
rosy and jolly.
Yes, exactly. Then people assume that they're kind and friendly, and therefore there's a bit more to them. There's more of a push, at the very least, for them to adopt those traits, even if that's not necessarily their personality.
The incentive is there.
Yes, exactly. And to talk a little bit more about the sort of difficult relationship we've got with judging people based on their appearance and history, we can go to the mid-century Germans and some of their propaganda posters. So I've got we've got the some two posters here from, this is for the film The Eternal Jew, which is probably one of the most anti-Semitic films ever created.
We do not endorse this film,
of course. Although the guy who directed this film, even though he didn't actually agree with the whole philosophy behind it, he didn't regret making it. He was just like, well, I wanted to be a filmmaker, and I made some films.
No,
it's just like,
didn't he?
Well, it's one thing to be a filmmaker and then another to make something like this, but you can see that they're trying to create an unrealistic sort of.
Well, ugliness
archetype.
is always an unappealing thing to present to someone. Virtue is always tied closely in with the concept of beauty. Beauty is tied closely in with the concept of symmetry, which you can see here. Not only is he not symmetrical, he is distinctly ugly, and he's portraying a vice.
Yes, and he's also, of course, got a sort of negative expression. He's got a very sinister expression on his face. And I do. There must be evolutionarily some reason that humans perceive these things as bad. Right? Like, if you were to meet a person like that, whether they were Jewish or not, you wouldn't trust them. You would think, right, okay, this person has some designs on me or something like that, and that's the intent that they're trying to portray and make you think of Jewish people generally. I think it's largely in the sort of way in which we can't judge each other's emotions without reading each other's facial expressions. I think it's why when you talk to someone, you look at their eyes, which is actually the best indicator of someone's emotions. And I've actually done research into facial perception where you change the features on the face. For example, you take features from someone who is happy and mix them with someone who is angry.
Right.
And normally the eyes in these mixed signal faces are the best indicator of the overall emotion, which is why I think when we're talking to someone, we maintain eye contact with them, because that's how you read how they're reacting to you. And I think that that's an extension of that. You can figure out their intentions.
Yeah, it's about essentially a form of mind reading that we've been endowed with by nature. So how to know the plan of the person you're dealing with, to be able to infer what they're likely to try and do. And this is why the Nazi propaganda is like, look at this guy. This guy is trying to hurt you.
Yes.
And worse probably. And so that's why they portray it like that. It's a totally natural thing that any human that had this kind of expression would be suspect, even if they were really handsome. But then if you combine that with ugliness, which is always unappealing and speaks to vice, speaks to someone not taking care of themselves, it speaks to someone who indulges or is just callous in some way. Whether these things are true or not, this is our opinion. This is the natural sort of gut feeling about these things. We assume that handsome, smooth-skinned, square-jawed people are in some way naturally virtuous, even if they were just lucky.
Well, yes. There's a fair amount of research that suggests that people who are attractive are rated as being more trustworthy, more agreeable, more dominant socially.
They get further in life, don't they?
They also
higher
get
paid careers,
lighter prison sentences, all sorts of things.
Beauty privilege is something that the left will never talk about.
It's a very real thing, though.
It is absolutely real.
I don't know how warranted it truly is, because as an indicator of personality, there's a little bit of something to it. However, it also doesn't necessarily dictate. Like I've known some very, very attractive women, however, they have horrific personalities, normally as a result of their attractiveness, in that they expect people to bend over backwards for them.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.